actually think that when you do get an artificial system, whatever you build it out of, up to a certain level of internal complexity, and I'm not entirely sure we don't know all of the ways in which it's going to be complex, but when you get this recursion and this internal reporting modeling going on, that I think actually qualitative states do emerge for those systems.
Following is my conversation with Matt McCormick. Matt is professor of philosophy at California State University, Sacramento. This is part one, hopefully, of a many-part series of my conversations with Matt. Matt and I, in this conversation, talk about theory of mind. We are setting the stage for consciousness in terms of defining the terms properly. Matt's area of research and teaching combines artificial intelligence, theory of mind, and consciousness in a very practical, pragmatic, easy to understand way. I, as a software engineer, and computer scientist, I find Matt's conversations very useful, even from engineering solutions perspective. You're going to see that Matt has a gifted quality when it comes to explaining complicated ideas. He has very unique sort of perspectives on these topics. I had a lot of fun in this conversation with Matt. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it a lot. And now, here is my conversation with Matt McCormick. Matt, sir, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks for having me on. I'm good.
No, we, the audience have been so looking forward to this conversation. I've been telling them now for months that you and I are going to find time to sit down and have this conversation. So no, I'm so looking forward to you in this episode introducing us to what consciousness is, and at many different levels, and how to think about that. And then you have this wonderful way to build these concepts up, which are very relatable and all that fun stuff. So with that, Matt, sir, over to you. Tell us a little bit about what you are planning on talking about today.
Thanks. That's great. That's quite the introduction. I don't know if I can live up to all that. Well, I'm a philosopher, so I'm in the midst of a bunch of hard-nosed scientists. I'm going to try to bridge that gap. That's one of the places where I feel like philosophers can sort of make the best contribution, is by providing conceptual clarity to sort of hard boundary problems that scientists are working on. So that requires us to know, or at least be familiar with, what's going on in some of these other fields. So I'm out of my depth with lots of computer science, but I have sort of launched into a project here several years ago, in the last 10 years or so of my career, thinking about artificial intelligence and sort of philosophy of technology issues. And there's a whole bunch of stuff out there that's to be talked about: ethics and the alignment problem and the singularity problem, and some really cool topics that you've had discussed on your podcast. But most specifically, I'm bringing over some of what I know from philosophy about mind and the construction or the nature of consciousness, and trying to think about artificial intelligence and the extent to which we could find or build another artificial intelligence system that has something we call conscious, or something that we think has a mind, which to some people's ears is an outrageous thing just to start with, right? That sounds really bizarre to lots of people. And I should also say, I don't know if I'll get to talk about this, but I've sort of, by doing that, I've spent a bunch of time in the last several years doing probability theory in philosophy classes, and teaching philosophy of mind, teaching decision theory, and game theory, to try to get myself sort of ensconced into those fields so that I can better understand how we might build a build a really good, really powerful mind that could be useful and helpful to us. Let me lay my cards on the table, because you've had a bunch of people on your podcast who have got positions. So I will sort of reveal what I think about this. I don't think it would be unnatural. I don't think it would be weird. I think it would be normal, or there'll be a time soon when we'll all feel pretty comfortable with this, with saying that, say, some artificial systems have minds. We're already kind of close to it. We always talk that way about our phones, kind of casually and the like. But let me just say, on a very high sort of functional organizational level, I think here's a short list of some things I think that are kind of necessary conditions. Now, the implementation and the planning, that's going to be hard, and that's going to take a lot of hard computer science work. But I think if we're going to abstract out to the highest level generality here, it's difficult. It's very hard to imagine attributing mind to a thing that doesn't have. So let me just give you my list. And these are going to map onto that distinction C0, C1, C2 that I'm going to talk about in a second. So attention, I'll talk about that. But neuroscientists call this selective signal enhancement. It's that some cognitive systems have this ability to, not only are they getting signals from their environments, not only picking up information, detecting information, but they're zooming in on, or isolating, or amplifying, or otherwise selecting out some of that information to the exclusion of others. So when you pay attention to something, you're very familiar with attention. Your cat's got attention. Lots of things have attention in the world. And at the second level, I've been really influenced by Michael Graziano, a neuroscientist at Princeton, who is doing some really cool work on what he calls awareness. He's one of the few intrepid or crazy neuroscientists who's willing to kind of tackle consciousness, which used to be sort of career suicide. You don't touch that, it's just too weird.
Yeah.
But Graziano has been arguing that he wants to call this sort of meta second level capacity awareness. So part of my approach here is, and certainly with my students, is the big picture is, look, I think we can understand consciousness. I think we can penetrate it. I think we can come up with a really robust, powerful theory of it, but we need to get some clarity on the concepts involved. So I'm going to lay those out, and we'll kind of run through in more detail if you want. But awareness then is being able to model attention. So that's second level, like, and this is something that's sort of immediate. It's instantaneous. It's effortless. It's not inferential. It's something that humans do instantly. I can look at your face and see where your eyes are pointing, and I have a kind of innate, immediate sense that, well, your mind is containing something. You're looking out the window, looking at a tree, or your attention was caught by the loud noise behind you. And I do that without sort of thinking it through or inferring. It's just sort of a sort of remarkable innate capacity I have. This is going to become important later in a conversation we're going to have later when we start talking about what's it take to get AI to the next level.
Yep.
And there's this controversy about, or there's this sort of tension in that discipline, as I understand it, between people who are kind of blank slaters who want to train up through machine learning, train up just all of the conceptual capacities that AI systems, artificial neural network systems have, versus people who are inclined to say we should build in some sort of innate or a priori physics, a priori psychology. So that's where those two really intersect. So you've got a a priori psychology that lets you, and little children, human children, have the ability to sort of recognize mind when it's in the room. They know when somebody's in the room, and when that person has a mind, or when daddy's asleep or whatever. They're immediately aware of the difference between someone who's attending or not. So that's awareness. And these are all very connected, but there's a recursive capacity here that I think takes us to the next level. That is being able to self-represent or self-aware. So not just a system that takes up information from its environment, and not just a system that has some capacity to model attention itself, but a system that can turn its own modeling capacities on itself and locate it. Now, the easy way of thinking about self-representation, self-awareness is just, your phone keeps, in virtue of the GPS network, keeps track of where your phone is. I use my phone to get back from San Francisco today. So my phone knows where it is, loosely speaking. That's spatial temporal self-awareness or self-representation. And that's easy. All you need is a cell network and the GPS system for that. But epistemic self-awareness is a next level capacity. That, and by that I mean epistemology has to do with sort of theory of knowledge. So it's being self-aware of yourself as a knowing agent, knowing what you know, knowing what you don't know, knowing what you know, knowing what you don't know. I just asked you some questions about your audience before we were talking about this podcast. So I'm forming a mental picture about who's listening and what do they know, what do they not know. So that's this really remarkable cognitive faculty that humans have, and it's sort of invisible to us because that's sort of the ocean in which we swim. I'm having a conversation with you. I'm keeping track of what you've heard, what you haven't heard, what you know, what you don't know, and I'm updating this model about what's going on in your mind. Okay, and now in Graziano's position is that modeling of your awareness is, and your attention is connected to just the flip side of the same coin of my modeling my own awareness. Those come together. So I recognize myself as a mind, I recognize you as a mind. That's all part of the same capacity. And these are maybe hard to tease apart, but it's a simpler, another way to cut up the pie here is to think of meta-cognition. So just having the capacity to think about your own thinking, like this next meta level of analysis. That's a really crucial feature. Okay, so that's it. I think that those are sort of minimal entry conditions to have in mind. So I, maintain, here's a way to run the experiment. If we encountered some alien machine and it exhibited all of those features, and I like it. I like the idea of encountering an alien machine instead of just an alien organism, because an alien organism, we have a bias in favor of biologies, and you run into an alien that's biological, and it's going to be pretty. Your system has very high false positive rate for attributing agency and mind to things. We think that your car has feelings. We give our cars names and things, so we're not trustworthy on that. But if we encounter an alien machine that's clearly a machine and is clearly alien, but it really exhibited, profound or robust evidence of those features, you'd be hard pressed to say that doesn't have a mind. It seems like it'd be very natural to say that thing has a mind. And then I'll pause. But here's one of the big sort of big doctrinal and kind of battlegrounds in philosophy of mind is, okay, what about qualitative states? What about having phenomenal subjective states? So bonus here, if the thing has got subjective representational states that are rendered to the subject as qualitative, private, phenomenal feels, if reds feel like red and bitter tastes sour or tastes bitter, or noises, the notes on the scale sound like something to it, then that's even better. That's even more, obviously that thing has a mind.
Is it not a good time to talk about? Is it not a good time to talk about subjective experience, or we wait a little bit, or bring that up right now?
Sure. I've got lots of slides here, but this is as good a place as any to think about that. I mean, I'll just lay my cards on the table. I'm a physicalist here, a naturalist. I think that mind is.
Would you also define those terms? That what does it mean being a physicalist and a naturalist?
Well, at the end of the day, all the facts are physical facts. They're all natural facts. That physics is whatever that turns out to be, quantum, or that physics tells the ultimate story about the rock bottom ultimate nature of the world. There's not non-physical stuff or non-physical facts out there. Now, that's a complicated debate in philosophy, science, and metaphysics and the like. But it's not that uncommon to just sort of naive empirical naturalism. Just what I'm not a dualist. I don't think there's magic. I don't think there's mysterious soul substance out there. And I'm also not a panpsychist, which is another sort of position here, that another way to carve up the pie. And that's a view that's getting some attention. But so the question then for people in philosophy of mind is, okay, so there's these qualitative states. I have them, you have them. Presumably you have them. Now, I don't know what yours are. Mine are private. Only I have access to them, and I know I have them. I feel things on the inside, and I assume you do too, but my access to yours is indirect. Like I can just see you take a bite of cherry pie, and then you smile or say something about how good it tastes, and I infer in virtue of your possessing equipment like mine and a brain like mine and nervous system like mine, that's probably what's going on for you is really similar to what's going on for me when I'm having cherry pie. But those are private, subjective, qualitative feels that we're both having. And what lots of people can't get their heads around in this discussion, at least in philosophy of mind, and or at least my undergraduate classes, is that those kinds of that subjective reality seems so different, so profoundly different in kind from the physical world. And people can't sort of accept or get their heads around the notion that could ultimately just be physical facts, or how it is that physical systems could produce that. That's kind of an abiding mystery about
it. There are a lot of questions that audience has that are on that topic. That I think you use this analogy in some of your conversations, that how can meat feel something, right? And a lot of questions are like that. And I think if I find a common theme, then the questions are along the lines of, do you have some ideas, as you talk about it, Matt, physical mechanisms that are potentially behind that subjective experience and that whole feel or phenomenology. I think David Chalmers is well, a lot of people know of him. He's a very sort of prominent philosopher, and he really has popularized the hard problem of consciousness, where he takes this position, and he's a very well-respected philosopher, that even after you explain all the functions and behaviors and the information processing, you still have not explained why does it feel to be something. And then there are, all people have different names for it, explanatory gap and other things. So I'm sure, and I'm sharing it with you because many questions from the audience are along those lines, that what do you, from your vantage point, what do you think about it? How do you, as a conscious mind, how do you process that in this, since the audience is mostly computer science, software engineering folks, and they have heard colleagues like Joshua Bach, who takes this position, matter, that he also says, I'm also a physicalist, but then it is a computation or a simulation running on top of physics, and matter cannot feel anything. So then why do we feel it? Well, we are living inside of a simulation or a dream or a story that brain tells itself. In that story, we are a character. And since we are trapped in that story, it feels like to us that there is something, but it is a function of us being trapped inside a software program. So
those Chalmers style arguments all hinge on this sort of rudimentary intuition. And it's an intuition, the one you put your finger on, that there's something weird and sort of counterintuitive about matter having feels. And those arguments, in one form or another, all hinge on me imagining, for example, all of the physical facts being the same, yet the phenomenal facts being not present, like in the zombie arguments, or different. But take the zombie cases. So Chalmers, is famous for presenting this zombie argument that I could imagine all of the physical facts being the same, yet there being it being completely dark inside this system. So the zombie doesn't have any fields at all. And if I can imagine something like that, if I can conceive of that, then the physical facts don't account for everything that entails the phenomenal fields. Okay, so I've got a deep beef, sort of technical, obscure beef with that move. And just to keep it short, I'll just say, look, our intuitions are the product of millions of years of evolution that really culminates in a lot of the more robust cognitive capacities we have come from the Paleolithic era. So you've got hominids running around on the African savannah looking for nuts and berries, trying not to get eaten and trying to figure out who's going to have sex with them. And you've got a bunch of cognitive skills that are built and intuitions that are developed in an evolutionary scenario to solve those sorts of problems. So it's not at all surprising that we start closing in on or making advances, fast forward 2 million years, to sort of modern neuroscience or modern physics. And it's not at all surprising that once science really gets up and running and we start getting, pushing the limits of what we can observe at the quantum level, at the astronomical level, at the neurological level, not at all surprising that the primates are all saying, this is counterintuitive. It doesn't fit easily with my feelings about what's true and what's false. You're not built for those kinds of facts and theories and nature at that level. So I'm not at all surprised about that. And I'm not prepared to make these big sort of metaphysical ontological moves about the nature of reality on the basis of those intuitions in that kind of case. So I just part company with Chalmers there and go, look, since when did your capacity to imagine some seemingly alternate state of affairs undermine a scientific explanation? Like, the case I often use here is like the lawnmower case. Like, could I imagine a lawnmower that's got a 2-horsepower engine on it and I understand all the facts about how combustion engines work and how gasoline works and how the pistons work and how the chemistry and the macro and the micro physical facts about how lawnmowers work. But could I imagine that all of that's in working order and that all the physics is the way it is, but then I start that motor up and it doesn't have 2 horsepower. It doesn't do anything, or it doesn't have any power. And I think I can imagine that, but I don't think anything follows. I don't think I've thereby disproven the combustion theory of chemistry by my imagining this lawnmower that doesn't, produce horsepower. So, and I've got lots of other examples, but my basic, reaction here is that, look, using your conceivability or imagination here to refute the scientific theories is a suspect move. To say that science doesn't explain because it doesn't, prevent me from imagining something weird. I'll leave it at that.
No, that is good. So from there, I can infer that certainly, as you said, that you come from a physicalist background, that matter arranged in a certain way, case in point, our brains, can give rise to a subjective experience that we have, that there is, that's all there is to it. Maybe today we don't understand the actual mechanisms all that well, but hopefully one day we will, and then the mystery along that journey will continue to fade away.
Yeah, I think we should be really cautious about making these pronouncements about what science is not going to explain, because boy, no sooner does somebody, history is littered with the corpses of people. No sooner does somebody say that, than some clever grad student at MIT goes to work, and then there's a paper, and there's like, oops, I was wrong about that. Oh, I was wrong about that. So, and oftentimes I think that the people who are, and no offense to Chalmers, because he knows the science here well, but I think some of the folks who are sympathetic with that view are not apprised of what's going on in some of these scientific fields. Because what happens is when you start understanding more of what's happening in neuroscience, more of what's happening in computer science with artificial intelligence, more of what's happening in psychology, you realize, wow, we're making a headway on all these fronts, and there's fast progress being made about lots of the details about brain function. And it's people's sort of lack of familiarity with a huge set of disciplinary literatures that makes it feel like, oh, we don't know anything. In my slide here is just about this sort of feeling that people have, oh, we don't know anything about consciousness. You'll hear people say that, or we know nothing about it. That's gets repeated. We can't understand it. Look, the part of that's coming from people not knowing the literature and not reading. And I've got a whole reading list I'll give you here at the end. And I'll throw these others out here. The other big mystery is, and we talked about this, how can sodium ions produce, a daydream or a plan about the future? And I think part of what's going on here is that you've got this micro-physical system that is staggeringly complicated. 83 billion neurons with 5 to 50,000 dendritic connections each, operating in parallel, right? That's just already way beyond my capacity to understand. And when people think about neurons firing or sodium or potassium ions at the cell membrane, they can't get from there to what it is to be in love.
Yeah.
But like, there's no surprise here because of the gap between how sophisticated that system is. We shouldn't expect us to be able to sort of even some genius to be able to get their heads around the full theory here, or have it feel like, oh, this is intuitive how it works, how it is that sodium produces thoughts. That's not going to happen. We're always going to be the same thing with quantum physics. It's always going to feel really weird and counterintuitive. Like the truth, we know the truth is bizarre and counterintuitive. So I'd be more worried if somebody comes up with a theory of consciousness and everybody goes, oh yeah, that's exactly right, that fits. That makes perfect sense. Like, knowing what I know about how humans reason and how poorly we do it and how limited we are, like that's a sure sign that the theory's wrong. Some ideas I had, partly what I'm getting at is that I think the more we are able to make some clear conceptual distinctions about what we mean by consciousness as a start, and see, in ordinary language, we talk about consciousness one way. In neuroscience, they talk about it in another. In philosophy, we talk about introspection, which is another sort of way of getting at trying to understand the thing behind the curtain. And in philosophy, so the more we sort of make some careful conceptual distinctions there, and the more we know about neuroscience, I think the more that feeling that we don't know anything or that it's impenetrable goes away. I think that you start feeling like, okay, I'm starting to see the thing, the shape and outline. At least that's what I feel like is happening in AI research. Like, the more of the AI research I read, and they're being informed by psychology and cognitive science, and you're starting to see people modeling artificial neural network systems more and more on more sophisticated human brain systems. And it's getting hard to say, oh, we're not making any inroads, or we're not, penetrating the mystery here. Like, the mystery's getting steadily chiseled away.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think the gap closes once this alleged gap. Long answer to your question. This alleged gap from the micro-physical level to the phenomenal level the walls start moving in, and starts making more and more sense how one could be connected to the other. We've talked about these. There's a range of views here. There's different ways to carve up the positions, but an limitativist might be, and something I'm sorry, I forgot the name, but the podcaster that you mentioned a minute ago sounded a bit like an limitativist. Somebody might just say consciousness is not a real thing. It's just an illusion, or it's just a simulation, or it's a sort of a mistake that's being produced by our systems. And Daniel Dennett is drawn to this view sometimes. He's kind of an eliminativist about some aspects of consciousness. It's a kind of trick that your brain's playing on you. I don't know if I love Daniel Dennett. I'm very sympathetic to lots of his positions, but I'm not sure if I'm not a limitativist about consciousness. I am a limitativist about some things. But on the other end of the spectrum, then there's, the other view is to say, one person says there's no consciousness, it's nothing. The other person says no, consciousness is everything. That's the panpsychist view. And
I have a question from the audience, and
Yeah.
the question is along the lines of that if everything is physical and the consciousness that we experience is a certain complex organization, but how about an electron? It has, two quantum states. It could be, when you measure it, it could be in one or the other states, referring to its electrical charge, things that it could be, quantum mechanically pointing up or pointing down on that spin. And the question is, does it feel something to be an electron? Is existence synonymous with consciousness? And if we were to ask an electron, we understand that it is trapped and it cannot talk. But if we were to be able to talk to an electron, would it say, yeah, I have two states. I don't feel much other than just those two states. So there is this question on that, is it, a anthropocentric or a human-centric view where we deny consciousness to fellow animals, fellow creatures, others, and then by extension do we say, no, only minds like ours who are complex, who are organized like that, have this thing, and most other things, even, regarding fellow animals who seem to me that they are feeling something, we deny them consciousness. So this question is along those lines. So it's not a pure panpsychist question, but it is more like that, hey, the fact that if I'm an electron and I can be in state A or state B, isn't being in a state is somewhat isomorphic to feeling that state is, kind of along those lines.
That's a great question. I think the answer is no, not about the electron. And here's why. I think, and this is, I'm glad I led with my minimal requirements for mind slide.
Yeah.
Because that's why I said attention, awareness, self-representation, metacognition, that once you get some of the self-representation, once you get some of those capacities online, then something new comes out of the system. So, and I think that lets me say something like this, that an electron or a whole bunch of electrons or the internet or a disorganized bunch of information recording states or something, not enough to be conscious. Unless we want to just erode what we mean by conscious. Like there's a way that you could, you sort of devalue the concept if you just say everything's got it. Okay, well, fine, you can use consciousness to talk about everything, but I want to talk about this thing. And that's this thing you and me are doing. When I'm talking to you, keeping track of your words, thinking about your mind, you're thinking about my mind, and I'm aware of my position in space and time and aware of my position epistemically. And electrons have positions, they have states, or they, especially when you measure them, they have states, but that's different than saying that you have a cognitive system that is processing its own information, it's self-representing, and it's getting recursive modeling, information modeling about itself. And that lets me say, of course, chimpanzees are exhibiting some really remarkable mind capacities, and we can empirically demonstrate that. And human children are showing them. And, the family dog's got some of them. But as you get further down the phylogenetic tree, just given the accidents of terrestrial evolution, you get down to less and less fancy systems. I think we got good reason at some point to say, no, those don't have consciousness, and things below there don't, because they don't have the hardware for it. An electron doesn't have the hardware for it. And I might have eliminated this slide, but Graziani used an example of a hydra, which is a little freshwater organism. It's just a really simple, it's like a plankton sort of little creature. Very, very simple. It's, we diverged from it in evolutionary history like 450 million years ago. And it has he says, undifferentiated ganglial net. It has some neurons, but they're not differentiated. There's no ganglial
Hierarchy.
cluster. There's no brain. There's no cluster. There's no mind. There's no sort of the thing that, and none of them have really specialized functions. They all sort of do the same thing. And his view is that attention, which is this capacity to zero in on some of your stimuli and then devote extra cognitive resources to it, that comes on the evolutionary scene later after the Hydra. So Hydra doesn't have it. Something's going on really rudimentary there. But it doesn't have attention, doesn't have awareness and these other fancier abilities. It doesn't have the hardware. And I think that's a pretty intuitive, and I think it's a pretty biologically responsible answer. And I don't think we have to go say, oh, well, everything or electrons are conscious or the internet's conscious. The internet's got staggering amounts of information coursing across it back and forth, but it's not information that's organized in the right sorts of ways and having the right kinds of feedback loops and back propagation and having the right kinds of modeling where it models itself in the right sorts of ways. And that lets me say some things are conscious and some are not. So I'm kind of one of these people who's I'm in between, it emerges in certain kinds of physical systems and not others. So I'm kind of in between those camps. And I'm not tempted to say, look, if, I have the same discussion sometimes when I teach philosophy of religion, where people want to go, I start out by talking about, this could be controversial to some folks. We start out by talking about, well, does God exist? And you say, well, the first thing we should talk about is, what do you mean? What sort of thing are you talking about? Well, the classic religions all say that there's this omnipotent, omniscient, all good, all knowing, omnipresent being who has a mind, by the way, who exists and is your creator and created the universe and blah, blah, blah. And let's talk about that, because the history of philosophy and religion, they've worried about that, whether or not that being exists a lot. But somebody will always say, oh, well, that's not what I mean by God. I mean, God is everything, or God is love, or God is the universe. I'm like, okay, if you want to use that label to describe the universe, and then we're going to ask the question, does the universe exist? Okay, the answer is yes. But you're using the word to capture something different. Obviously, love exists, but we want to know, does that thing exist? That we're going to confine our discussion to that topic. So I feel like sometimes people are moving the goalposts on the consciousness discussion when if you cloud you confound the notion of consciousness enough that it starts sounding like electrons have it, then I'm not interested anymore, because I was still trying to think about that thing that you and me have over beers.
Yeah. On that note, Matt, using your definition, it's clear to me that in your definition, I can be a robot and I can still have a mind, so far as I am conforming to the definitions that you put a few slides ago. And also, I think in that sort of a definition, it does not care too much about whether I'm having a private subjective life or not, or whether I'm running on physical substrate X or physical substrate Y, so far as I fulfill those requirements that you laid out of, sort of higher orders of representations and self-modeling and all that good stuff, then that you would say, well, it looks like, a mind is there. And that is important for me as a software engineer, that, hey, you can think of then creating mindware, in a computer, in a silicon system, and we can set aside the whole phenomenology sort of question for somebody else, because it is a very private thing anyways. Like, as you said, that, we can only, even about each other, we can only infer about each other's phenomenological states. We only have access to our own inner lives and that sort of a thing. So that is good for me to know that none of that in your framework matters. And a robot with a clever software running can, emulate properties of a mind,
Yeah.
and you will grant it mindhood
Yeah.
if it is behaving. If I am, for example, a software robot, and you wouldn't care whether underneath my skin some funny hardware is running, and you wouldn't also care whether I'm right now feeling something or not.
Yeah, that's great. That's exactly what I'm trying to do here. Is I'm trying to get ahead of the ball.
Yeah.
And you mentioned anthropomorphism. Look, we don't want, I think, if mind is a thing, or consciousness is a thing, which I think it is, we don't want to have a anthropomorphic definition that or an anthropocentric definition that says only humans can have it. Like that's just, we don't want to be speciesist about it. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do, is be sort of substrate neutral about what we build it out of.
That's a great word, substrate neutral.
Yeah. And so silicon or carbon or whatever, I don't think that's what matters. I think it's the organization of the information processing system. But here's where I will diverge with the way you just put it, is that, and this is crazy, I admit this is a crazy sounding view that I have, is that I actually think that when you do get an artificial system, whatever you build it out of, up to a certain level of internal complexity, and I'm not entirely sure we don't know all of the ways in which it's going to be complex, but when you get this recursion and this internal reporting modeling going on, that I think actually qualitative states do emerge for those systems once they get up to a certain level of sophistication. So not only would I say it has a mind on having those first minimal features, but I think it's going to have qualitative states too.
Question for you there. Those qualitative states that may potentially emerge, do they come from some underlying fundamental physical properties? Do they emerge because of that organization? Or is it like that Joshua Bach thing that you and everything else that you are experiencing, and you are an experience as well, you are all stuck in that software program. It is made up of the same stuff. So the thing that I think is me, and this thing that the me calls pain, or the redness of red, right, or whatever, that we are all made up of same qualitative stuff. That is why it feels something to me, the redness of red, my pain, whatever. So is it coming from some physical basis, or is it, in that, some other, emergent camp? Or suddenly I'm a physicalist as well, so I would not go to where idealists would go and say, this is a different mental realm. So what is your take on, because I agree with you, I would like to believe that under those conditions of organization, qualitative states, that if a mind shows up, somehow qualitative states accompany as well. I would love to believe that. And then my question is, what is your intuition on the physical, the mechanism or the basis for that?
Yeah, that's great. And let's really get into the heart of the issue. Look, I think that when you get a cognitive system that is as complex as ours, or the ones we're talking about building, one of the things they need in terms of a resource management, just to deal with resource management emergencies, is that the world, there's all this information flooding in from the sensory periphery, and biologists and neuroscientists and computer scientists all know that cognitive processing resources are scarce. There's only so many computations you can do, only so much time in the day, and so many calories you can burn, and only so the world, the unit, the the agent has to select and filter and then render that information down into a map, a modeling that's less, has less fidelity, that rejects lots of information. And in so doing, certainly with human systems, it renders it into really simple valences, that a whole range of physical events outside of me or physical events in my mouth will feel salty or feel sweet, even though there's a whole bunch of really different physical things going on for different kinds of sweet or different kinds of, imagine artificial sweeteners and sugar and so on. They all taste sweet to me. My system renders those as an internal report of what I'm experiencing. So, and I don't know the author you're talking about, but there is a sense in which, yeah, I'm operating in a simulation. That's all it is that I'm a subject. I'm an agent in the world that is living in a cognitive model that I access as a subject. That's sort of the remarkable and staggering thing about it. That's what's so amazing, is that there's subjectivity at all, and that I can know my own thoughts, and my thoughts have sort of colors and feels and flavors to them. Well, colors and feels and flavors are the way the system renders all of that information down to a manageable, workable short list, a short précis, a short report. I'll borrow an example from Christoph Koch, who got this from Reagan. He said one of the things Reagan did when he was president was that he had every day, he would have all of his cabinet members come in and give a single page reduction report on what was going on in housing and urban development, and the Secretary of the Interior and the Department of Defense, and all the different cabinet members would come in and give a short report, and it couldn't exceed a page. So there's this vast networks of these bureaucracies out there that are working, generating all these, huge volumes of information, and that all gets condensed and rendered down and down and down and down to the short one-page report that Reagan could read to see what was going on in the country, right? And I think qualitative fields are those. And that's a solution that evolution came up with to let you make fast work of a really complicated, an information environment, and figure out what's salient in the environment. Evolution stumbles on pleasure and pain as a way to give you feelings of aversion or appeal and steer you around to get you to go towards some things and away from others. So it feels good or feels bad, even though the physics is, incredibly complicated and there are lots of details in the background. So the crazy view that I've got is to suggest that once you get a information processing system up to a certain level of sophistication and self-reporting and internal reporting like that, then it has feels. And I think it's got to have feels in order to manage, to deal with the, to get it, well, it doesn't got to, but with humans, our attention is very limited, and it's exclusive and it's inhibitory. When I'm focusing on one thing, I shut out all these others. And it's a way of directing cognitive resources. Now, in AI research, I take it, we may not be similarly, confined to some of those same bottlenecks. We may not have to use attention the same way. We may not have to use awareness the same way. So we might come up with some really radically, alien sort of seeming minds because they're not configured the same way. But I think having subjective qualitative states is a thing that they're going to have. Now, not having tongues, they're going to be very different. They're going to be built out of silicon or something, but they're going to have internal reports in the form of qualitative states.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think in that sense, you are also on this specific point fairly close to Daniel Dennett, who describes that at some level, consciousness is brain's operating system for itself. It is he uses terms like it is a useful simplification and all that good stuff. Now, it makes a lot of sense. It is exciting to me as a software engineer that one day we can develop systems that have these agents and subjectivity in it. It is very, the potential of that happening to me as a software engineer is like hugely exciting. So I'll say one thing. I'll let you continue with your slide points. So this one friend of mine, he's at MIT, he's a neuroscientist. So he said, Amjad, if you want to dabble into consciousness, start looking at the experience of pain. Pain is a very human thing. And I'm not going to tell you anything. Just go on, have a journey on pain. Every time you experience pain, or just go study pain. So to me, as a novice, as a layman, it was very interesting to find out that perceptions, they are a construct of brain, and then there are mechanisms that can make perceptions conscious or not. Like before studying some of that stuff, had different point of views, but then I learned, okay, pain, it is starting from some, sensation, some nociception and those receptors. And I, have both an electrical engineering and software engineering background, or a computer science background. So then electrical engineer in me said, okay, I can see, here are these neurons. I see wires, a wire going on here, a signal going. I can see all this wiring and all that stuff. But then to me, it was also amazing to know if you cut that. In fact, that part was less amazing, where when somebody said, well, if you cut the cord and there is no signal going on, you cannot, then of course you cannot perceive. But then as I continued on that journey and I learned, okay, sometimes there is no signal, but you are feeling pain. Brain is creating a sensation of pain. Then my journey stumbled into all the phantom limbs and phantom pain. Now you don't even have a limb, but you are feeling an excruciating amount of pain in a phantom limb that no longer exists because its map is still there in the somatosensory cortex and whatnot. And it was fascinating for me to learn that perception is not some passive reflection of the world. It is an active construct that brain creates, and sometimes it doesn't even need a stimulus for that to happen. So anyways, it just fascinated me that how even pain is experienced in body, and suddenly pain is a very personal thing.
And let me add to that. That's great. That really fits with what I'm saying. And let me add to that we treat, especially in these discussions, we treat these fields as if they're sort of monolithic, atomic, homogeneous. They have a particular unique kind of atomic nature to them, as if pain is pain and sweet is sweet and bitter is bitter. But when you start, and this is to some of my earlier points, when you start looking more closely, probing around at it like you're talking about, both from the subjective side and from the objective side. So play around or we alter or we look at different variations on the way the nervous system is relaying the signal, or what's going on if in a phantom limb pain case. Or the other examples I like here to kind of disrupt our intuitions is that, you talk about the examples with drugs, with recreational drugs, with lots of psychoactive drugs that are used in, surgery cases or in psychiatric cases. There's a whole host of these chemical compounds. So the obvious ones are like ketamine, LSD, psilocybin, MDMA, where they're psychoactive. Some of them are more hallucinogenic than others. and you introduce this chemical compound into the system, and it starts unraveling some of the coherence, the coherent function. And people report and tell sort of wild stories about what their subjective experience was like before the subjective experience just sort of dissolved altogether. But it starts becoming clearer and clearer, more and more plausible that the chemical basis, the introduction of a molecule into the brain then disrupts the function of these neural nets enough to make the pain not feel unpleasant, is one of the examples that Dennett likes.
Yeah.
Or to give it a different character, or to tease apart some aspects of a field that you never were able in your conscious, normal life, sober life to see. And then the drug gets in there and messes up the function of the system, and the thing is suddenly now amorphous or vague, or got the boundaries on it are different, or there's blurring over to other sense modalities, all kinds of really interesting, weird things happening there that, I think fortifies this view that, and I wanted to say this about the electron point too, is that consciousness emerges at the neural level, I think, and at the neural system level. It's not at the, of course, atoms and molecules and sodium ions are doing information, doing information transmission, but the action is happening at the big macro system level, with these signals that are coursing across the cerebral cortex, that at the big level. That's where I think that some of the really important aspects of consciousness emerge, which also opens the door for us building these other systems that can emulate it, right? Because I don't think it's a subatomic phenomena. I don't think it's an atomic phenomena, and it's not a mysterious phenomena. I think it's that physical systems, and in the human case, when you get it up to, sort of brain size and brain complexity, then you get it. This is something that caught your attention, and it's a distinction that I get a lot of use out of. So let me just preface this with, I am lifting this wholesale from Stanislaus Dehaene, McCatch, Lauder, Cow and Lauder. There's several sort of neuroscientists, especially Dehaene. This is really his distinction. C0, C1, and C2 consciousness. And that really, if we're going to be scientists of consciousness, this really helps kind of make a conceptual clarification to help us keep track of what we're talking about. And it cuts across or maps onto some of the distinctions I've already made. So for Dehaene, at the very bottom level, when information comes in, that's the most rudimentary, basic entry level cognitive processing. Stimuli or representations in the cognitive system that play a causal or functionally definable role in information processing. So that sounds technical, but the idea is just that you get your eyes open, and there are, there's EM radiation in the 600 nanometer range, among other EM radiation, that's bombarding the back of your eyeball, and you've got neurons, you've got cells back there that are firing wildly, because that's their receptors that are really tuned to that wavelength, or further down, 800, so down in the, or further up, so that's in the red end, is it? I get those mixed up. So roughly the visible light spectrum. You've got these receptors in the back of your eyeball that pick up on those. So 800 nanometer EM radiation wavelength is going to trigger your receptors, but if ultraviolet radiation hits you, or X-rays or radio waves hit you, that are all very different wavelengths, they're out of the range of your eyeballs, you're none the wiser. Those, when the X-ray technician at the hospital turns on the X-ray machine, you've got no idea. You've got no receptor that picks that up, so you've got no awareness of that. So that's not X-rays are not C0 for you, but red EM radiation is. And then next level up then is, and we might also call this, especially if you can't, there's lots of these that happen to you that you don't know about. So you're the subject of, you're being bombarded with all kinds of C0 information all the time. And actually very little of it, talking about my bottleneck or my sort of hierarchy of information, lots and lots of that never gets beyond those very low level processors those neurons do their work, and then that just disappears into the past. And it never makes it to short-term memory. It never makes it to speech centers. It never makes it to motor centers. So something in the room happens and it just passes through and moves on, and no more, out of sight, out of mind. And some of these are subconscious or subliminals, another way we talk about them. Not all of them, but some of them. So when people talk about the subconscious, and I'm not using it the way Freud used it or the way people talk about their dreams, I just mean below the C1 access level.
Yeah.
So let's see, I had there's a bunch of good examples of these ones where, oh, well, if we flash a picture of a face at you for 250 milliseconds, you can't report on it. If I flash the face and then I flash a long noisy signal at you in a study, if it's under 250 milliseconds, I think, and I ask you then, did you see anything? You'll go, I didn't see anything. I don't, what, have we started yet? But then if I then subsequently give you a task, like identify this picture right after I flashed you the prime, it turns out that first subliminal prime will affect your performance on the task that happens next.
Yeah.
So I can prime you with a picture of Tom Cruise. You don't know you saw it, and then I give you a picture of Tom Cruise and say, identify this picture, and you will say, that's Tom Cruise, faster than you would have if I had shown you a picture of somebody else. Yep. Even though you're none the wiser about the C0. Okay, so that's what I mean by C0. Some of this you know about, lots of it you don't know about. Your system is processing hordes and hordes of information like that. Okay, so C1 then is next level up. This is information that has been, for whatever reason, there's lots of reasons in the brain this happens, but this is information that gets boosted or gets more cognitive resources dedicated to it. And I need to show it to you long enough, and you need to think about it, you need to be focused on it or whatever. But these are representations that get more cognitive resources, and then as a result, you might be able to consider them, might be able to verbally report on them, you might be able to think about it, you might remember it, it might make it to short-term memory. If you dedicate enough of your brain power to it, it becomes a thing in your life. So for example, when you were driving to work today, I assume you drove to work, maybe you didn't. You were driving at some point today.
I did.
You read a billboard, and that billboard, the words on the billboard just sort of moved through and out of your consciousness. And now you can't tell me what you saw or what the words were. I mean, there might be some that you do remember. You might say, oh, there's this one billboard that I do know near my house, but there were some that you read that are now gone. Or the face of the person you bought coffee from today. Like that was obviously in C0 consciousness because you bought coffee from them. But now you can't remember if it was male or female or blonde or brunette, or you can't say anything about it. So that's a really nice way to think about lowest level rudimentary cognitive processing versus talking about it, pointing at it, using words, remembering, getting more robust processing. And I think that's very useful because as soon as you're equipped with those two distinctions, and then C2, which I don't think I have it on this, it's on this slide. C2 then is self-attribution. Yeah. So for Dehane, that means that I saw a billboard today. I'm talking to Amjad right now. So not only am I processing what's going on around me, and not only is it C1, but I'm actually attributing it to myself, and I've moved it into this really robust picture where it's part of my world, and I go, there's me and Amjad, and I've got an idea, a thought that's about him, and I'm doing this really robust thing. So this distinction, C0, C1, C2, it kind of maps on unconscious, conscious, but it lets us then start looking at physical systems and wondering about how sophisticated is their information processing, and we can map it, and so Dehane's suggesting that this helps us understand how we might have AI systems that are conscious. So attention then, I've already talked about this a bit, but it's selective signal enhancement, right? It's singular, it's limited, it's inhibitory of other signals. And one of the interesting things about attention in humans is that you can direct your attention top down, like you as a kind of executive agent can point it at things, or it can be captured bottom up. So there's a lot of give and take from low level to high level here, where you might say to yourself, no, I need to stay focused on this project because I have to finish it by midnight, and you keep yourself working on task. Or a loud noise goes off and you startle and go, oh, what's that? And it pulls your attention to it. So that's attention getting directed around both ways. So that's C. That's what happens from C0 to C1. One is the boosting of signal enhancement, which is very intuitive for, I assume, for a software computer science engineer being able to. So here's actually a question I have for you. It seems to me that with humans, and in evolutionary terms, attention is a solution, a limited solution that evolution stumbles on to let it do things like have the cat stalk the bird, or let you stalk, let some Paleolithic hominid stalk its prey and keep on task. And it seems to me that a computer engineer might be in a position to think, we want to build an AI agent, but we don't want it to have the bottleneck that humans do. Maybe we don't want it to be as exclusionary or inhibitory or as narrow, or maybe we don't even want to have attention. I mean, it's a way to distribute computational work, but maybe we want to come up with a radically different way of, I don't know, I've had some weird ideas about this. And we should probably talk about these in the next lecture. But
I think the AI systems, Matt, they have a similar need, meaning they are also acting in a real world environment or in a business data-rich environment. And the environment has so much going on in it, and they have, tasks to perform, and they need to make these decisions that which information can be helpful and what it is that they should attend to versus not. And so I think this applies there as well to AI systems as well. And I think they're figuring out what to attend to. That becomes very important as well. Like for us people, it is intuitive, as you said, the bottom up, it just happens. And then you say, oh man, I'm noticing it. Where did that come from? And top down, you have some kind of, thing going on in your executive function, in your prefrontal cortex. And you say, well, I'm in this loop, I'm working on this project, or I have to, stay focused. And then you direct your attention resources to that. AI have, in many cases, similar needs as well.
Right. Okay. So let me push on this further then, because and this actually gets to the qualia point. With humans, your attention, your attended states have a particular granularity to them. There's like there's a granularity to the time, the amount of time a moment takes. You're listening to the words in my sentence, and you're threading the words now in my sentence together with the words at the beginning of my sentence. And you held all that in a buffer and kind of threaded that together as an object, period. So now you got the sentence in mind. And for humans, through some of this is sort of evolutionary accident, right? It was a sort of blind process that produced some remarkable capacities, but it has a particular organic terrestrial character to it that in part happened through historical accident, because there's no design component to evolution sculpting out this cognitive system. So it gets me thinking, and this is probably better for our second discussion, but it gets me thinking about what if the granularity of the moments was broader or deeper or had more, it had more, contained more information in it than ours, that my moments are rendered down to really simple, very oversimplified, cartoons, simulation,
No, that is a
simulated
very
cartoons of
that is
reality.
a very important point, that in AI systems or software systems, that short-term memory buffer, that tracking of time, its granularity, its fidelity, its length can be a lot more. It also could be non-linear in nature, meaning it doesn't all have to be all in some episodic sequence either. So you are right, there are all kind of architecture opportunities abound. You mentioned, Matt, earlier, interdisciplinary focus and how you can make more progress by being interdisciplinary. Interestingly enough, attention and resource allocation is a big part of computer design. So if you're studying computer science, you take a lot of these courses and you learn a lot of these skills where you have a computational environment and there are finite resources in terms of what can be in the memory or not in the memory, or things if you have to move out of the memory to the disk or a low performing sort of storage medium, and then you are performing some computation. So these modern computers that even we are using right now to have this conversation, they have a lot of that built-in circuitry and algorithms that decide what to keep in memory, what to throw out, how much to keep, and that kind of a thing. Like a big part of an operating system is to decide, like brain, okay, I have this memory, 16, gigs, 32, 64 gigs, whatever, that we now have amazing memories in our computers. But still an operating system has to decide, it is finite. What is it that I keep in it that is going to meet the future demand that the world is going to throw at me? So it is always predicting that what do I keep? Because if it is predicting it accurately or with higher accuracy, then its performance is very high, because the humans or other systems that are interacting with that computer, they initiate all kind of stuff. They want it to do work, and it says, aha, you want me to do this, and I already have all the required pieces right here on the table in the memory. The processor can take it and do stuff with it. And if it has to always throw that out and bring stuff from disk into memory and whatnot, it would be a very slow, painful experience. So past 50, 60 years of computer science have made a lot of progress on attention and resource allocation type algorithms. And then it kind of, some of those algorithms, Matt, are relatively simple. Like you use a family of algorithms and stuff, but one very simple one is, okay, stuff that I have not used in a while in the memory, that nobody had any need for in a while, whatever while is, let me, when I have to free up some space, let me throw that part out, because quite in a while, no demand have come for that piece and things like that. But to your point, a lot of sophisticated architecture and engineering can go into designing these attention and resource allocation protocols, which makes it super exciting.
Yeah, it gets me sort of, I'm not as constrained by the reality as you are, so it gets me sort of speculating about all these wild possibilities, right? it makes me think of a map. So what a map, if I take an old school paper map, a map is a rendering down and reduction of information complexity from the world to a cartoon version. And we're equipped to be building this sort of ongoing three-dimensional physics model on the fly all day long with your primate brain, and it's equipped to do it a certain way and give it a certain character. And the prospects here we're getting clearer on these big macro structural features, functional features of brains, and realizing, seems to me, that what people in your field would be I'd be really excited about the future here, is the prospect of being able to throw out or come at it with a really different sort of design plan.
Yeah.
About, you realize evolution uses attention and uses awareness in these ways to solve hominid problems, and that's useful, and it solves an information triage problem for us. But maybe our artificial systems need not be limited in quite those ways or different ways. Or I've had these sort of, you guys do supply chain management stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I've had these sort of speculations, these fantasies about, imagine if a really advanced 100-year down the line AI system is tapped into a sprawling global supply chain, like Toyota, what they must have, the supply chain that's feeding into, them producing cars or something. Imagine an AI system whose capacities were, broader, deeper, more nuanced, or different in their information character, and able to sort of, propriocept the state of the supply chain on the planet,
I think
at this level that the human engineers who built it could never imagine. You could never experience.
Those things might come maybe hopefully sooner than later.
Yeah.
So companies like Facebook or Meta now and Microsoft, so they have these concepts of metaverse and virtual reality, mixed reality, augmented reality universes. They are betting, big tech companies are betting big on that. And it, to me, is a fascinating field where you were mentioning how psychedelic drugs, while you are under their influence, they can alter the state of consciousness, and consciousness can feel very different, or the subjective experience can feel very different while you are under that. So imagine if once we have ways to enhance and modify our software, if you will, and then all kind of possibilities for that. So if I am in a certain mode and I want to do a lot of different type of work, but in order for that work to be more meaningful, or for me to be more productive with all the computers that I'm interacting with, I need my consciousness to be in a certain way during that phase. And if I'm able to do that, get into that state, do that work with all that sort of, working with other computers, and bring all that sort of, fidelity and creativity to it. And then I go back to my, my primate consciousness mode. If we can engineer, even for us, many different experiences, that would be awesome. And to your point, Matt, just the thing that is extremely fascinating for me is this cyborgy kind of a thing, where if it truly is, when a mind comes into existence, then somehow qualia comes along as well and whatnot. So then hopefully, if we are able to extend our consciousness along these many different dimensions, we can experience many different qualia, and it will prove your theory or your mental model as well, that that was just, some attachment. You were attached to something for a while, whether the attachment was physical or chemical, whatever the nature of that was, but you experienced all this extra consciousness. And you don't want to be there all the time. Some people do, but you don't. And then you decided to say, okay, I'm done with that work. I'm going to go back to my normal, human primate consciousness, because that is my comfort zone. I'll go back there. Those would be, it just gives me goosebumps to think about, that we are headed in that direction. I hopefully all the psychedelic research and other such similar research that is going on, it allows us to figure out, how to, create many meaningful other states of consciousness. And to your point, Matt, maybe in some of those versions, we are able to see so much better and whatnot that we do realize that we are messing up, Earth and climate and our home and that sort of thing. And I'm not making a political statement here. I'm just saying whatever the problems are that we as humanity face, and there is no shortage of the problems, that maybe we would say, okay, I see it, and I experience it the way I have never experienced it before, using just my primate consciousness. I can no longer ignore it. I need to create some influence and whatnot. So even when I go back to my, primate low-level consciousness compared to this enhanced one, I still have a memory of that. I just experienced that. I can describe it now in my natural language. I don't have all that qualia anymore because I'm no longer in that consciousness state, but I have a memory of all that. I can describe it in my rich natural language. And if I want to, I can always go back to that enhanced state. The possibilities abound, then of what we ourselves would be able to do as people. And that to me is just, I know that I'm daydreaming here a little bit with you real time, but that excites me.
There's several things here, several responses I have, and I'm just going to abandon the script because that's all really interesting. You're making me think of a bunch of neat things. First off, let me recommend a science fiction short story written by a philosopher, F. Scott Baker. It's called Crash Space. And it's very much about this kind of scenario about cybernetic enhancement of your qualitative states. And it's an excellent story. And it's so provocative.
I'll read it. I know that.
Second, on the topic of hallucinogenic drugs, another great book here is Michael Pollan's recent book called How to Change Your Mind. And he's the famous food journalist professor from Berkeley who he's written a book about psychedelic drug use. It's really good and explores some of this. And then there's two other things I want to lose track of these. Okay, two things. Software one, and I is another. Okay, so you just kept saying something really interesting. You kept saying, give me this chemical compound or alter my states in this way, and I will see things differently. My qualitative states will change or whatever. And you said, I, me. So one of the tricks here, one of the hard parts here is that when you disrupt the kernel of subjectivity and you disrupt its qualitative states, you also disrupt, at least with the drugs we have. You disrupt its subjective recursive functions as well. So people very often have this feeling of, I became one with the universe.
I became one with the universe.
And my individuality dissolved into reality and all this. And people are, you mentioned natural language, people are struggling then with their sober brains to try to talk about this kind of ineffable experience that is very difficult to sort of put language on, right? Because, and this fits with our tiered system of reporting, that those are experiences that couldn't make it out to verbal speech centers because they were all disrupted. They're all messed up because you're high on acid or whatever. And you're not able to form a coherent model enough to be able to remember, to report on, to talk about it. The stuff you end up talking about later is like a dim reflection of it, including the eye stuff. Really interesting to see what more advanced understanding.
Very true statement. My hope there, Matt, on that point is that the future versions of these controlled, enhanced, hallucinatory experiences can put us in a state that is more useful to a certain set of tasks and enhance our productivity and creativity. You are so true. Now, I have never experienced any psychedelic drug myself, but many of my friends have, and they have that common thing of, and they do it for recreational purposes. In fact, all my friends on West Coast, they think I'm so boring because it's not chill at all to turn down a psychedelic, sort of experience.
Well, I've always been a philosopher who's been surprised at the lack of interest in my colleagues, because I've always been like, do you know what this drug does? Philosophically, the implications are so interesting to have your subjectivity get teased apart or have it unravel and then have it get put back together this way. So even in grad school, I was always really interested in experimenting with lots of recreational drugs and then teasing out the philosophical implications of it. Okay, the other thing I wanted to ask you is you've used the term software many times to refer to, as a metaphor about what's going on with humans. Okay, so now I'm talking to an expert. I want to find out if this is right, because I've been trying to disavow my students of the sort of old school go-fi approach to AI, where they think about programming and computers in terms of serial lines of code and implementing the software that then, ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk goes through discrete operations on pieces of information. And I spend a lot of time trying to communicate to them, insofar as I understand it, what parallel distributed processing is, what artificial neural networks are, and why it's so different and so important what's happened in the last 20 years with connectionist networks instead of, and what it does is it pushes hard at the metaphor, because the hardware software metaphor was never very good on humans and human brains.
Correct.
But artificial neural networks and connectionist models start looking more like the way humans are built. And so I wondered about your comfort with the use of the term software when you talk about what's making your brain work.
Yeah, no. So I think even in that context of today's machine learning paradigms and whatnot, you still need a little bit of rule-based logic and machine learning and all those things in your architecture to write a software that can perform useful functions. All machine learning is really general purpose function approximators, function modelers, just trying to learn a very complicated y equals f of x, whatever that function is that maps x into y, without somebody giving you all the rules or the logic or the requirements. And many times when it gets to perceptual inputs, the rules or the logic is not understood, or you cannot describe it in natural language and whatnot. So, but machine learning by itself cannot be the full software. You need many other components as well in an architecture in order for software to have many different layers and for it to do what it needs to do. So machine learning is a very important part of the toolkit and the architecture, but you still need a lot of rule-based logic still as well. And I'm in that sense just using the term software loosely, and certainly in case of a brain, the distinction between software and hardware is all fused. But I just wanted to make that distinction that even today in the narrow AI field, we still have machine learning components. They are able to do classification and segmentation and clustering and that sort of thing. They are able to, tell you stuff or help you make decisions, but you still have to put that in with other pieces of the software in order for that to work in totality. There are things that are very deterministic in nature where you cannot take any chances of the rules are very well understood, and you cannot take any chances of that your answer is going to be 92% of the times accurate and other times not. So you make choices that okay, wherever I don't have any rule-based logic and I just have a lot of data or labeled data that I can, then my machine learning apparatus can learn from that, and I can have all these different models, and I have a way to keep those models fresh. But on fault tolerance, or when I run into this situation, for me to have a reflex response, as an analogy, that I don't have time to go up, down, this, that, whatever. I know I need to take my hand away from that situation. So there is a lot of that kind of logic as well in the software today, and you combine both to create the experience that the software creates.
So we should definitely pursue this some more in the next conversation, but tell me what you think about this is right, if anything. I find myself sometimes trying to pry open people's intuitions and get them over some of their initial skepticism about machines having minds or anything else having a mind. They want to make it sort of magical. And I spend a good bit of time in class when we talk about AI stuff or Turing test and the like, take that product of that machine learning cycle after you've trained up one of these artificial neural networks that's got this distributed set of nodes, in the model that are now weighted appropriately so that this thing has this high performance and is able to, with a high degree of reliability, perform whatever task it is you got it performing, visual identification task or something. But it does it as a result, if I understand it right, of this machine learning training cycles. And the result is that there's a kind of knowledge and a kind of conceptual, that the thing has, for lack of a better term, it's got concepts in the hidden layers. It makes perfect sense to say it's learning the concepts that let it correctly identify the cats or identify the things or whatever it is, and that they're getting embedded in those hidden layer nodes, and getting people to sort of understand, at least non-computer scientists, to understand the different resulting beast there from the way they think about, old school coding of just, hitting play on a program that then runs a bunch of C++. And I use that point to try to get them to be more receptive to the idea that this thing is more like a mind than you thought, because it's built the way minds are, and the nature of the resulting, network is a lot more like your neural network than what you were thinking about old school lines of code.
That is a very true statement, that there is a lot of recursion and those types of things going on. That is very true. One thing that I would say though is I just recently started studying cell biology, and it is also fascinating to learn that this view that neuron or any cell in the body, in this case a neuron, is just an on-off transistor switch, is also a very crude approximation. It looks like there is a lot that is going on in a biological neuron. It has a lot of structure and hierarchy and differentiation. When you look at it from a detailed perspective, it just looks an amazing, a full computer, a processor, memory, all that by itself. And but you are so right that the analogy that you're using, that how the concepts of cats and dogs and trees and whatnot, and a pedestrian, or whatever in these big networks, in a very distributed fashion, those concepts get represented, and there is no one pathway. There are multiple pathways and whatnot. And then a crude analogy to neuroplasticity: as you continue retraining the network, then if there were pathways that were previously using to identify or detect a pattern, and if that pattern is no longer present in the word, and that you have never used that pathway again, the continuous training will use that to train itself, use that pathway to do something different. So there are definitely analogies between artificial neural networks and what goes on in the mind.
Yeah, and I think those are philosophically important, sort of getting people on board about this idea. I said a bit about this at the outset, but I'm really fond of this Michael Graziano's account of awareness as a way of understanding in human systems how they're achieving this recursive self-modeling and this module they've got for recognizing attention in the world. And I wanted to tell a story about, or at least I'll prime the way for a discussion about AI. And I know nothing about computer science, but it seems to me, I'll throw this idea out there. I just got a new car. I got a new Subaru, and it's got a really smart, good autopilot system on it. It lets you set the distance from the car in front of you and the speed and the margins, and it lets you, it'll stay in the lines, and it's maybe not as good as a Tesla system, but it's really quite good. And what struck me the other day is really interesting about it is that all the camera system on my Subaru pays attention to is the speed of the objects around me, and then it has all kinds of alarms and alerts. It even has an automatic braking system if the differential between my speed and the speed of the car in front of me is really big. If that car's slowing down rapidly, then my car, kicks in, and it'll even lock on brakes on its own to stop. And what struck me as really interesting is how superficial, even as impressive as all that is, how superficial it is, that it's just operating on the basis of the sort of movement and superficial behavior of the objects around me. The cars in the lane next to me, the cars in front and behind me. And I mentioned earlier that philosophers use this intentional stance, a theory of mind, to talk about as a kind of, and this is from Dennett, but this seems to me as a very useful tool that's going to help in AI research. And they're already working on this, but Dennett talks about the intentional stance. So humans are able to view each other as minds with beliefs, desires, goals, disbeliefs, dispositions, and dislikes. And that gives me a very fast, very information processing effective way to deal with and predict your behavior. As soon as I think of you as a mind who's got goals, desires, beliefs, and all that, I can make fast work of what's going on when I'm watching you do stuff. Because suddenly your behavior all makes a lot of sense to me as soon as I've got that ontology of beliefs and desires and goals and agency inside there, as I attribute a mind to you. And you're going to the store or going to the coffee shop and getting coffee and all that makes perfect sense. That wouldn't make as much sense for my modeling if I'm just looking at the superficial surface details about a body movement and its velocity and all that. And so that really, for me, that really brought out this point. My car driving, I know what's going on with the drivers in the car next to me. I know what the drivers want. I know what they don't want. And I know how they're going to behave because of their goals as agents. And that's why I'm so much better in some of these situations of stepping in and interrupting the autopilot and taking over, because I can see before, or I know before my car knows, trouble's coming up there because I know how humans behave and I know what humans want and what they desire. And my ability to model them as believing agents, as minds,
Yeah.
suddenly gives me this really robust predictive capacity that is, is a whole order of magnitude more powerful than just my Subaru's capacities.
So true. And that is a extremely astute point, Matt, that you made, that because theory of mind is totally missing from today's AI systems, it puts them at that extreme disadvantage. Eventually, they will grow to have that, but up till that time, there is going to be a human in the loop, like you said, that you are in your Subaru, and while it was doing its thing, you have a theory of mind prediction going on that other driver. You can predict what that driver probably is about to do, which your Subaru today is not going to detect, or it is going to be very difficult for it to detect that. So that then brings this humans in the loop, humans, machines working together. But until AI develops that theory of mind, which is no small feat, it is always going to be at a big disadvantage. And that is such a true point. Same thing for Tesla. Its full self-driving computer has no, there is no theory of mind going on. It is slightly more sophisticated maybe than your Subaru, but principles are the same, that it is just, figuring out from the different sort of, whatever is coming in its vision field, it's just reacting to that. It is not saying, well, this, I'm a mind, or, the person sitting in the driver's seat is a mind, and same thing there, and some kind of a theory of mind going on. Today, AI does not do that. It's a huge opportunity, a drawback of today and the future sort of opportunities. And maybe we'll, to your point, talk more about it in our next conversation.
Yeah, there's so much to think about there. I take it that the challenge, of course, is that building the computer architecture for that is just this huge task, to be able to build this sort of modeling the metacognitive at this metacognitive level, which is one of the things I think I got metacognition on here is the end of my list. A set of cognitive functions that monitor other cognitive functions and reports on their quality, confidence levels, and content, and so on. I talk about that quite a bit more in my class. So this is the full list of the big concepts I wanted to sort of share. I thought might be relevant to share with you, your audience, and you. And I lay some groundwork in my class for, and then I'll just put this on here so people can look at it in case they're interested. I've mentioned some books, I've mentioned some authors, and I don't like people saying we don't know anything about the mind. So here's, I think, 7 really good, important books, in my view. I know you mentioned Anil Seth earlier. I'm only about 100 pages into that book, but so far it's really good.
It is very good. I am.
So here's a bunch of really good books that cover some of this discussion, at least from the neuroscience and philosophical perspective. There's some of both on this list.
You would be impressed that I have about 80% of that in my bookshelf behind me.
Awesome.
Has about 80% of those books, but there are some consciousness and the social brain. I don't have that, so I'll order them up, but looks like a really good list, and it would be awesome for our audience to go through that as well.
Sure.
Yeah, this has been a fascinating chat. I mean, you have been so generous with your time.
Sure.
I'm going to schedule another time with you, hopefully within a few days, within a week's time, to kind of continue with this rhythm and momentum, and then we'll go more into AI and artificial systems and people building those systems. What sort of things they should think about, and but thank you, sir, for so generous with your time today.
No, this has been great fun. Thank you, Amjad.